In a forgotten corner of an ancient castle, where the air tastes of dust and time, a single candle flickers beside a stack of weathered parchments. The light trembles against stone walls blackened by centuries of soot, and in that dim halo, a historian speaks softly, as if fearful that the silence itself might listen too closely. His voice carries the weight of something older than memory, older than kings or kingdoms, a whisper about a crown that promised glory yet delivered nothing but ruin. The hollow crown, he calls it. And even in the calm of the night, the name feels like a breath of cold wind down the spine. The room is silent except for the faint creak of timber beams above and the steady scratch of the historian's quill. Outside, rain drips steadily through cracks in the roof, each drop echoing like a slow heartbeat. It is here, amid the relics of a world long dead, that the story begins, not with conquest or celebration, but with remembrance. The crown rests on a velvet cloth before him, dimly gleaming, its gold tarnished to the color of dying embers. Jewels, once brilliant, now seem to drink the light instead of reflecting it. It looks less like treasure and more like a wound that never healed. He studies it the way one might study a ghost. Every curve of its design tells of hands that shaped it in both devotion and despair. The historian has read countless legends of kings who ruled through strength, cunning, or faith, but this crown, he knows, belonged to none of them truly. It owned its wearers. It wore them in its own way. One by one, they rose to power under its gleam and fell to ruin beneath its weight. His trembling hand traces a single crack along the crown's rim, and he wonders, not for the first time, whether the curse lies within the metal or within the men who craved it. He closes his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, the centuries unfold like a living tapestry. He sees torches glimmering in storm-soaked battlefields. He hears the echo of drums announcing coronations. He watches his hands, some trembling with hope, others steady with ambition, lower the crown upon royal brows. And every time he sees the same ending: fear, betrayal, fire. It is as though the crown demands payment for every moment of splendor it grants, a debt measured not in gold but in blood and madness. The historian opens his eyes again, breathing slowly, and the candle's flame bends toward him as if drawn by his unspoken dread. In the corridors beyond, wind sighs through broken glass, carrying with it the distant moan of the sea. The castle stands on a lonely cliff where waves gnaw endlessly at the stone foundations below, a reminder that even rock yields to time. He rises from his desk and walks to a window where the horizon fades into mist. Somewhere beyond that gray veil lie the graves of the kings he has spent his life studying. Some lie in cathedrals with gilded ceilings, others in unmarked earth where grass grows thick. Yet all of them share the same silence, the same story carved invisible into history's skin. Every king who wore the crown met a horrible end, and still, each believed he would be the one to break its curse. The historian's reflection stares back at him in the cracked glass, his face pale, hollow-eyed, illuminated by the trembling flame behind him. For a moment, he sees the crown not on the table but upon his own brow, gleaming faintly in the window's ghostly mirror. The thought chills him. He looks away, but the image lingers in his mind like a scent that won't fade. Power, he realizes, is not loud or violent. It is quiet, patient, waiting for the moment when longing turns to surrender. He returns to the table and opens a leather-bound book whose pages are frayed and yellowed. Names fill the margins: Athelard, Louis, Edmund, each followed by dates and annotations, some written in his own hand, others by those who came before him. The ink varies, the handwriting changes, yet the pattern never does. Ascension, triumph, decay, death. It is as if time itself keeps rewriting the same tragedy, only changing the actors. He begins to write, the quill whispering against the page. The crown was never meant for mortal heads. It was born of grief, tempered in ambition, and fed upon both. The sentence feels heavy, as though it does not come from him at all, but from the story speaking through him. The candle burns lower, pooling wax like melted bone. He pauses, listening again to the stillness of the room. Somewhere deep within the castle, a door creaks open and then slams shut, though no wind should have reached this far. He tries to dismiss it, yet a shiver runs the length of his spine. Legends say the hollow crown whispers to those who seek to understand it, that it can twist knowledge into obsession. The historian shakes his head and forces himself to keep writing, telling himself that he is not one of those men, that he studies truth, not myth. But the air grows colder. The flame gutters once, twice, then steadies again, smaller than before. He thinks of the first king, the one who dared to place the crown upon his head when it was still new, believing he could wield destiny as one might wield a sword. He thinks of the second, who mistook it for a divine gift. And the third, who sought to tame it with reason. The historian does not yet know their stories in full, but he feels them coming, like waves gathering far beyond the shore, their crests unseen but inevitable. Each carries a fragment of the same sorrow, the same hunger. Every tale he will tell begins and ends with the same gleaming circle of metal. The candle's flame finally steadies, burning with a faint blue edge. The historian exhales and leans back, his eyes half-lidded, his voice no more than a murmur. "It's not the crown that's hollow," he whispers to himself, "but the men who wear it." His words fade into the quiet, merging with the rhythmic sound of the sea below. The story feels ready now, alive, waiting to be told. He dips his quill again, unaware that somewhere within the crown's dull gold, a tiny pulse of light flickers once and disappears. Outside, dawn hesitates beyond the horizon, as if uncertain whether it should rise upon such a tale. The historian continues to write, his voice barely audible over the scratching of the quill. And so begins the curse of the hollow crown, forged in mourning, carried by kings, remembered by none. The words settle into the silence like falling ash, and the candle gives its final sigh. The last ember fades, leaving only darkness, and the whisper of the crown, faint and endless, echoing through time. Long before the first king ever placed it upon his head, before it earned its cursed name, the hollow crown was nothing more than an idea born from grief. The tale begins in a forge buried deep within a dying kingdom, a realm still trembling from the ashes of war. The air there was heavy with smoke and sorrow, filled with the scent of burnt iron and wet earth. At the center of that dimly lit workshop stood a blacksmith whose name history has long forgotten. His hands, scarred and trembling, moved not with the pride of creation but the bitterness of loss. His sons had perished in battle, his lord had fallen to betrayal, and his homeland had been reduced to ruin. In the king's death, the council demanded a new crown, one that would symbolize rebirth. But as the blacksmith gathered the remnants of the past, he did not see rebirth, only the ghosts of what was gone. He collected shards of broken swords from the battlefield, pieces of armor twisted by flame, and arrowheads blackened with blood. He melted them together in the heart of the forge, each fragment carrying whispers of its former owner. The molten metal hissed and screamed, as though unwilling to be reborn. When he poured it into the mold, the fire burned with an unnatural hue, a strange bluish-white glow that no bellows could have produced. The blacksmith hesitated, feeling something in the air shift. He had forged crowns before, many for lords and conquerors, but this one felt different. It was not being made for anyone. It seemed to be making itself through him. Days passed, and he labored in silence. Villagers spoke of how no smoke rose from his chimney, though the forge still burned. When he emerged, his eyes looked hollow, his beard singed, and his breath shallow as if he had been speaking with someone unseen. He carried the crown wrapped in coarse cloth, unwilling to look upon it directly. Those who saw it later described it not as beautiful, but unsettling. The gold was darker than it should have been, as though it drank the light around it. The jewels, ruby, sapphire, and onyx, seemed to shimmer faintly, but the reflections were wrong, like eyes blinking out of rhythm with the world. Even before it touched a king's brow, the hollow crown seemed alive, listening. The council praised the blacksmith for his craftsmanship, calling it a masterpiece worthy of legends. Yet he said nothing. He merely nodded, turned away, and vanished from history. Some said he was found dead by the river, his hands blackened, his body cold though the day was warm. Others claimed he fled to the mountains, haunted by what he had made. Whatever truth existed, it was buried beneath the first coronation, when the crown gleamed proudly in the sun, its strange glow hidden beneath the splendor of ceremony. Trumpets blared, banners unfurled, and the people cheered. None noticed the way the new king's smile faltered when the metal first touched his skin. None saw the brief wince, the sharp intake of breath, or the flicker of something, fear, recognition, pain, that crossed his face. The crown, though solid in form, was unlike any other. Its band was slightly concave on the inside, as if designed not to rest comfortably but to press, subtly and unyieldingly, upon the wearer's temples. Around its rim were etchings in a language no scholar has ever deciphered, symbols that seemed to shift when studied too long. Some say they were prayers, others believe they were warnings. The pattern repeated 13 times, forming a perfect, unbroken loop. To those who gazed at it for too long, the shapes began to resemble faces, grim, silent, and eternal. It was as if the crown carried within it every cry ever uttered in pursuit of power. As word of its making spread, whispers grew in taverns and temples alike. Some claimed the blacksmith had been visited by spirits of the fallen, demanding a relic that would remind men of the price of ambition. Others said he had forged it under an eclipse, when the sun itself turned hollow. Yet the most persistent tale was the simplest, that the crown was born from mourning, and that grief, once given form, could never be undone. It was not a symbol of unity, but of absence. A ring of gold meant to fill the emptiness left by the dead, only to become a vessel of that emptiness itself. When the king who first wore it sat upon his throne, the courtiers described a stillness that filled the great hall. The air seemed thicker, the torches dimmer, as if the crown absorbed every sound. One chronicler wrote that when the king spoke his oath of rule, his voice echoed twice, once from his mouth and once from somewhere behind him, deeper and fainter, repeating his words as though mocking them. That night, the king dreamed of standing before a mirror where his reflection wore not gold, but a ring of shadow. He awoke gasping, yet when he looked upon the crown, it seemed perfectly ordinary. Still, he ordered it locked away until his formal coronation, telling his attendants that power should not be rushed. The crown's name, the hollow crown, did not come from its appearance alone. When struck, it gave off a sound unlike any metal, not the clear chime of gold, but a deep, lingering hum that resonated like breath through an empty chamber. The sound unnerved even the bravest knights. It seemed to echo too long, fading only when one stopped listening for it. And though it was meant to rest upon the heads of kings, every man who held it felt an odd sensation of weight, not physical, but emotional, as if burdened by countless unseen eyes. Over time, the legend of its making became inseparable from the fate of those who wore it. Monks wrote that its gold came from the weapons of the damned. Poets said it was forged from tears. In truth, perhaps it was forged from both, the sorrow of loss and the hunger for control. And that, more than any curse, was the beginning of its power. For a crown is not evil by nature. It becomes so through the hearts of those who desire it. The hollow crown, however, seemed to remember. It seemed to choose. Centuries later, when scholars unearthed fragments of the original forge records, they found strange marks burned into the parchment, as though seared by invisible hands. In the margins, faint words were scrawled in ink so faded it could barely be seen. It listens still. None could confirm whether the writing belonged to the blacksmith or some later scribe, but those who read it claimed to hear faint hammering in their dreams for nights afterward. Even now, when the wind passes through the ruins of that old workshop, travelers say it carries the rhythm of a forge that has never truly gone cold. And so the crown entered the world not as a token of majesty, but as a vessel of sorrow, a hollow made of gold, waiting to be filled again and again by those who could not see the emptiness within themselves. Every kingdom that sought it believed they could command its legacy. Every hand that touched it felt both awe and unease. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty is not the opposite of terror, it is its disguise. The hollow crown gleamed softly in its chest of cedar and silk, patient, ageless, and alive. Somewhere, the echo of the first hammer strike still trembled in the dark, whispering the same silent promise, that every beginning carries within it the shape of its end. When the crown finally found its first master, the world was still raw from centuries of war. Kingdoms had risen and crumbled like sandcastles against the tide, and among the ruins walked a man whose name would echo through both legend and warning, Athlod the Bold. He was not born to rule. He was the son of a fallen lord, a commander forged in battle rather than bred in silk. His hands bore scars from sword hilts, not from the delicate weight of quills or rings. Yet it was precisely that, his strength, his fierce sense of destiny, that drew the people to him. They whispered that he had the courage of 10 men, the mind of a strategist, and the fire of a prophet. They called him the Uniters, though he had yet to prove it. When Athelred first saw the hollow crown, it lay upon a velvet cloth within the vault of the old capital, gleaming faintly in the torchlight like a relic from another world. His advisors warned him against it. They called it cursed, an artifact that had already claimed the sanity of the smith who forged it. But Athelred was not a man to be frightened by tales. He saw in it not a curse, but a symbol, one that could weld the fractured lands into a single kingdom. To him, fear was a weapon to be turned against enemies, not one to yield to. He lifted the crown with both hands, feeling its unexpected chill, the strange weight that seemed to press not just upon his palms, but upon his soul. For a moment he hesitated, as though the air around him had thickened, and then he smiled. "If fate wishes to test me," he said, "then let it come as gold." His coronation was unlike any before. Bells rang from spires long silent, and the people gathered in endless crowds beneath banners stitched with his sigil, a white falcon rising from a black field. The air was filled with song and incense, the sky a bright wash of color as dawn broke over the ramparts. When Athelred knelt before the archbishop, the hall trembled faintly, as if the stones themselves held their breath. The crown descended upon his head, and a hush fell. The moment stretched long enough for every soul present to feel something, an unseen ripple through the air, faint but undeniable. Then came the cheer, vast and thunderous, as the new king rose. He smiled, though behind that smile lingered the memory of that brief pulse, like the beat of a second heart beneath his own. At first, his reign was golden. Athelred was everything a king was meant to be, decisive, just, unflinching. He rebuilt cities, reunited warring provinces, and opened trade routes that had long been choked by fear and greed. Under his rule, the fields yielded abundance, the seas grew calm, and even his rivals sent envoys bearing gifts rather than threats. He was the king of prosperity, the man who tamed chaos. People spoke of him with reverence, as if he were blessed by the divine. The hollow crown, resting proudly upon his brow during every ceremony, became a symbol of hope. Poets called it the light reborn. Children carved its likeness in clay, and mothers whispered his name as prayers for peace. But in the quiet hours of night, when the torches dimmed and the courtiers slept, the king began to hear something that no one else could. It began as a soft murmur, faint as breath over glass. At first, he thought it was the wind curling through the arches of the throne room. Yet the words grew clearer. They were not in any tongue he knew, but they carried meaning, an undercurrent of warning, of promise, of something vast and ancient that stirred beneath the surface of the world. Sometimes he would awaken in his bedchamber drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, convinced that someone had spoken directly into his ear. "You are not the first," it would seem to say. "You are not the last." Athelred told no one. He was a man of strength and reason, unwilling to appear weak before his court. But as the days passed, he began to see things at the edge of his vision, shadows where no light fell, faces in the grain of wood, movements in mirrors. When he turned to look directly, there was nothing. During council meetings, he would catch his advisors watching him uneasily, whispering when they thought he could not hear. His temper, once legendary for its restraint, began to fracture. Minor mistakes by his ministers became offenses punishable by exile. Soon, the laughter that once filled his court was gone, replaced by the silence of fear. The dreams came next. They began as fleeting images, a battlefield drowned in molten gold, soldiers sinking into shining quicksand, and above them, a crown floating in the sky like a burning halo. Each night the dream grew longer, more vivid, until he could smell the metal and feel the heat blistering his skin. In the final moments before waking, he would hear the same whisper, always behind him, "You asked for unity. You shall have it, in death." He would wake gasping, his hands trembling, the echo of the crown's weight still pressing upon his head even when it was locked away in its chest. His queen, Elswyn, was the only one who dared speak of it. She found him standing before the mirror one dawn, pale and unshaven, staring at his reflection as though it belonged to someone else. "My love," she said softly, "you have not slept. The crown weighs on you." He looked at her through hollow eyes and replied, "It is not the weight that haunts me, but the silence when I take it off." From that moment, she began to fear not for his reign, but for his soul. She begged him to destroy the crown, to cast it into the sea or bury it deep where no hand could find it. He refused. "It binds my people," he said. "Without it I am only a man. With it I am history." Yet history, as he would learn, has a hunger of its own. One autumn night, during a festival in the capital, a storm rose with sudden violence. Thunder tore across the sky like the roar of a beast, and lightning split the horizon. The great hall shuddered under the force of the wind. Athelred stood at the balcony, the crown upon his head, staring into the storm. Servants begged him to come inside, but he did not move. Those who saw him later swore they heard him speak, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "I see them, all who came before." His eyes, they said, were not his own. When the storm passed, the dawn revealed a kingdom untouched, but a king forever changed. From that day onward, he wore the crown constantly, as though it had fused with his being. He no longer laughed, no longer shared counsel, and no longer sought company. Those who dared to look into his eyes claimed to see reflections of things they could not name: burning fields, broken thrones, faces weeping in darkness. He spoke little, and when he did, it was of inevitability, of cycles, of the cost of power. "All crowns are hollow," he murmured once. "Some simply remember it better." The people still loved him, but their devotion turned to fear. And though peace endured for a time longer, the first cracks had begun to form, small, invisible fractures in the walls of his mind and his kingdom alike. For every triumph bore the seed of its undoing, and every golden age casts its own shadow. The hollow crown, silent yet listening, gleamed faintly in the candlelight as though aware that its work had only just begun. The fall of Athelred began not with rebellion or invasion, but with a whisper, one so faint it could have been mistaken for the sigh of wind through the palace corridors. Yet to Athelred, it was unmistakable. He heard it in the quiet moments between waking and sleep, a soft voice threading through the darkness, patient and persistent. At first, he tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was only exhaustion or the echo of memory. But soon, it began to answer his thoughts, completing sentences he had not spoken aloud. It soothed his doubts and fanned his pride, telling him that none but he understood the burden of destiny. And when he closed his eyes, he saw its shape, vague and luminous, like the glint of gold beneath deep water. His advisors grew cautious. The king who once held open counsel now dismissed his ministers one by one, claiming that loyalty could only be tested in solitude. He had the royal seal altered to bear the symbol from the crown's inner rim, 13 curved marks that no scholar could interpret. He ordered the archives sealed, the chroniclers silenced, and the clergy to rewrite prayers in his name. Those who questioned his will were not executed, but vanished quietly, as if erased from time itself. Still, Athelred believed he ruled wisely. The whisper assured him that all he did was necessary, that order must be built upon fear, and peace upon obedience. The queen no longer recognized the man beside her. His face had grown lean, his eyes sunken and shadowed, his once steady hands trembling slightly even in stillness. He rarely spoke to her except in riddles, his words turning inward like mirrors reflecting mirrors. "I am close," he would murmur, gazing at the crown resting on its stand. "It speaks of a kingdom beyond kingship, a place where the ruler and the ruled are one." She begged him to rest, to leave the crown behind, but he only smiled a thin, distant smile. Would you ask a prophet to silence the divine? Soon, the dreams that once haunted him began to bleed into waking life. During court sessions, he would pause mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, as though hearing something no one else could. Once, in the middle of a ceremony, he stopped before the assembled crowd and whispered to the empty air, "Yes, I see you." No one dared ask to whom he spoke. His captains began to worry. Rumors spread through the city that the crown had bound itself to him, that if he ever removed it, he would die. In the taverns, songs that once praised him now carried darker verses sung in hushed tones, verses that ended with words like madness and betrayal. The first open fracture appeared in the northern provinces. Taxes had risen, soldiers had grown restless, and the people spoke of rebellion. When the council urged restraint, Athelred laughed. "They do not rebel against me," he said. "They rebel against fate." He marched north at the head of his army, wearing the hollow crown even into battle. His generals begged him to remove it, fearing it would make him a target, but he refused. On the morning of the decisive siege, a strange mist rolled over the battlefield, thick and golden gray, swallowing banners and torches alike. When it cleared, the king's army found their enemies already dead, their faces twisted in terror though not a blade had touched them. The soldiers called it a miracle. The chroniclers called it divine wrath. But Athelred said nothing. He stood among the corpses in silence, his eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of his crown. When he returned to the capital, victory brought no celebration. He no longer cared for feasts or praise. The courtiers found him wandering the great hall at night, barefoot, muttering to shadows. The queen pleaded once more for him to cast the crown aside, and in a moment of anguish she reached to take it from his head. What followed became legend. The king recoiled as if burned, his eyes flaring with something not entirely human. "Do not touch it," he roared, his voice echoing like thunder. Then softer, trembling, "It listens when you speak of it." The next morning, the queen's chambers were found empty, her presence erased as if she had never existed. No funeral was held, no announcement made. The court knew better than to ask. The realm, though outwardly stable, began to rot from within. Strange fires appeared in distant villages, crops failed without reason, and birds no longer sang near the castle walls. The peasants whispered that the land itself was mourning its king. Even the river that ran through the capital turned a dull bronze color under the sun, as though reflecting the metal of the crown rather than the sky. The people began to avert their eyes when Athelred's carriage passed, fearful that a glance might draw his attention and his curse. The end, when it came, arrived quietly. One night, a storm rose from the east, blacker than any the kingdom had known. The sky flashed with white fire, and the castle shook with the voice of thunder. Servants saw light flickering beneath the king's chamber door but heard no sound within. When they entered at dawn, they found the room untouched, the windows shattered, the tapestries scorched. Athelred lay slumped upon the throne, the hollow crown still upon his head. His eyes were open, staring toward the ceiling, his lips frozen around a single word: "It speaks." The flesh of his hands had fused to the armrests of the throne as though metal and bone had become one. No wound marked him, yet his face bore an expression of awe and terror, as if he had witnessed something vast and final. The priests called it divine punishment, the scholars called it madness. But those who saw the crown that morning swore it gleamed brighter than ever, its jewels pulsing faintly like embers. The council ordered it removed, but no one dared touch it. Finally, one of the young guards, trembling, lifted it with gloved hands and placed it back into its chest. For a moment he thought he heard a sigh, so faint it could have been the settling of air, and then all was still. Athelred was buried in the royal crypt beneath the great cathedral, his tomb carved with the words, "He united what could not be united." Yet no one sang at his funeral. The people mourned in silence, for they knew that their golden age had died with him. The chest containing the hollow crown was locked within the vault beside his sarcophagus, sealed with 7 bolts and blessed by the high priests. The keys were scattered across the realms so that none could ever wear it again. But the crown does not sleep forever. It waits. It listens. Deep in the darkness of the crypt, where the light of day never reaches, the faintest glimmer of gold still breathes beneath the dust. The whisper continues, patient and eternal, as if retelling the story of the first king who believed he could master destiny, and instead became its servant. Centuries passed, and the tale of Athelred became a distant echo in the halls of memory. The hollow crown, locked within its vault beneath layers of stone and sanctified seals, was reduced to myth, its curse remembered only in fragments whispered by aging monks and scholars who dared not write its full story. The kingdom itself changed hands many times. Dynasties rose and fell, wars reshaped the borders, faiths replaced one another in cycles of devotion and decay. Yet, beneath all this motion, the crown endured, silent, buried, but never forgotten. And as generations drifted into the fog of history, there came a new ruler, one who believed that glory could be reclaimed from the ruins of the past. King Alaric was young, ambitious, and restless. He had inherited a fractured realm, poor harvests, empty coffers, and nobles divided by greed. Yet he possessed a charisma that could ignite a crowd and a mind too sharp to rest in comfort. He saw himself as a restorer of greatness, destined to bind together the scattered pieces of an empire long faded. From the moment he ascended the throne, he sought not just power but purpose, something that could mark his reign as divine. The old prophecies fascinated him, especially those that spoke of kings touched by fate. When his advisors mentioned the sealed relics beneath the cathedral, he smiled and said, "Perhaps destiny sleeps beneath our feet." His counselors urged caution. The crown's legend was not one of triumph but of ruin. But Alaric dismissed their fears as superstition. "Curses are born of weakness," he said. "I do not fear the shadows of the dead." One evening he ordered the royal historian to gather every surviving record of Athelred's time. What emerged from the dust were fragmented accounts, symbols, drawings, and half-burnt pages that spoke of a voice, a light, and the unmaking of reason. Alaric studied them by candlelight, night after night, until the line between curiosity and obsession began to blur. He started to dream of a golden shape hovering just beyond reach, whispering his name in tones both tender and commanding. The words were indistinct, yet the feeling they left behind was intoxicating, the promise of greatness beyond mortality. When at last the high priest refused to speak further of the relic, Alaric ordered the vault unsealed. The cathedral's lower chambers had not been entered in over 300 years. The air was thick with the scent of decay and incense, the walls weeping with moisture. As the masons broke through the final barrier, the echo of iron against stone rang like a bell through the crypt. The last slab fell away, and for the first time in generations, the hollow crown saw the light of torches. It rested upon a pedestal of black marble, untouched by dust or time. The jewels glimmered faintly, their colors shifting in the flickering light as though alive. Alaric approached it with the reverence of a pilgrim. His men stood back, uneasy, the flame of their torches bending oddly in the still air. "Do you feel it?" he murmured. "It's as if the air itself breathes." When he lifted the crown, the silence deepened. The gold felt warm, almost pulsing, like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. He placed it upon his head without ceremony, expecting the weight of history but finding instead a sudden clarity, as if every sound, every heartbeat in the world aligned into a single perfect rhythm. His vision sharpened. The darkness around him thinned, revealing patterns and shapes that no mortal eyes should see. For one fleeting moment he felt infinite. Then, just as swiftly, the moment passed. His guards saw him falter, clutching the sides of his head, then straighten again with an unsettling calm. "It's beautiful," he whispered, though no one dared to ask what he meant. That night, he forbade anyone from mentioning the crown in his presence. He wore it always, at councils, at banquets, even in solitude. His speech grew slower, more deliberate, as if he were translating thoughts from a language older than words. The people, seeing their king adorned in brilliance, began to believe he truly was chosen by fate. But in the quiet corridors of the castle, the servants whispered of strange things, doors that opened by themselves, mirrors that shimmered with faces not their own, and faint music echoing from empty halls. In the weeks that followed, Alaric's reforms transformed the realm. Crops flourished, trade routes reopened, and the weather itself seemed to favor his lands. Scholars called it the dawn of a new age, and the people rejoiced. Yet with prosperity came unease. The king's eyes, once bright with life, now seemed to hold a faint golden sheen. When he spoke, his voice carried a resonance that unsettled even the most devout. He began to predict events before they occurred: floods, births, betrayals, each one precise and unerring. "The crown shows me the shape of things," he said to his council. "It teaches me how the world breathes." None dared to contradict him. But power bought at such a price does not come without hunger. Alaric's dreams returned, more vivid than ever. He walked through landscapes of gold dust and burning light, where faceless figures bowed before him. A voice spoke softly from the void, "You are the bridge. Wear me, and I will make you eternal." The words filled him with both rapture and dread. He began to avoid sleep, fearing what he might see. When he did close his eyes, he often awoke with blood on his palms, though he bore no wounds. The court physicians could offer no explanation. His mind, they said, was burdened by visions, not illness. But even they could not explain the faint whispering that echoed in his chamber long after he was alone. The queen, much like Athelred's before her, grew terrified. She found her husband standing before mirrors for hours, murmuring to his reflection. "Do you see it too?" he asked her one night. "The light behind the glass? It waits for me." His hands trembled as he spoke, yet his expression was serene, almost blissful. The queen wept and begged him to remove the crown, if only for a night. He smiled sadly and said, "It cannot be removed. It is not worn, it is bound." From that day on, she slept in a different wing of the palace. Then came the night of the eclipse. The entire kingdom gathered to witness it, a dark sun hanging above the city like an omen. Alaric stood upon the palace balcony, the hollow crown gleaming with a light that no fire could match. As the moon swallowed the sun, a low hum filled the air. Those near him swore they heard voices, not in their ears but within their bones, chanting, calling, weeping. The king raised his arms, and for a heartbeat, the shadowed world was lit by a burst of golden fire that seemed to pour from the crown itself. When the light faded, Alaric was gone. Only the crown remained, resting upon the cold stone where he had stood. They searched for days, but no trace of the king was found. Some said he had been consumed by the light, others claimed he had transcended, becoming one with whatever power the crown contained. The high priest sealed the relic once more, declaring that no mortal hand must touch it again. After the disappearance of King Alaric, the kingdom fell into an uneasy silence. The priests sealed the cathedral vault again, but fear had already spread through every corner of the land. Crops withered where they had once flourished, and the air itself seemed heavier, as if burdened by something unseen. The people spoke of the king not as a man but as a presence still lingering among them. Some swore they saw his figure in the fog, standing upon the battlements at night, the faint glow of gold shimmering where his head should be. Others said his voice could be heard in the wind, whispering promises of glory to those who would listen. The hollow crown had claimed another, and though centuries might pass before its next awakening, its hunger was eternal. In time, a new dynasty rose. The house of Varenthia brought with it order, industry, and a fragile peace. For nearly 200 years, the realm prospered. The legends of the hollow crown faded once more into the pages of old chronicles, read only by scholars in dusty monasteries. Yet, beneath the palace foundations, the vault remained, a sealed mouth waiting to speak again. Among the Varenthian rulers, none dared to disturb it, save one. Queen Ilara was unlike her forebears. She ascended the throne in an age of decline, famine in the north, rebellion in the west, and foreign powers pressing at the borders. The people called her the Iron Widow, though not for cruelty, but for her resolve. She was young when she took the throne, and the council of old men who thought to manipulate her soon discovered she was far sharper than any of them. Yet even she, strong as she appeared, could not escape the whisper of legacy. For in the royal library, hidden among relics of forgotten kings, she discovered the chronicles of Athelred and Alaric. The pages were brittle, the ink faint, but one phrase appeared again and again across the centuries. The crown speaks to those who listen. Ilara read the accounts in secret. The more she learned, the deeper the ache in her heart grew. Her reign was crumbling despite her efforts. Famine worsened, the nobles plotted behind her back, and the church began to doubt her divine right to rule. Her people needed a symbol, a miracle. And so, in the darkest hours of her despair, the stories of the hollow crown became less a warning and more a temptation. What if, she thought, it was not a curse but a test? What if the weakness of past kings had twisted what was meant to be divine? The Chronicles spoke of light, of voices, of visions of eternity. Was it not possible that the crown had shown them truth too vast to comprehend? Her advisors noticed her growing distraction. She spent long nights in the catacombs beneath the palace, tracing old symbols carved into the stones. The high priest warned her that such curiosity bordered on blasphemy. The relics of madness should remain buried, he told her. She replied softly, and yet, every prophet was once called mad. Soon after, she dismissed him from court. The queen's solitude deepened. She began to dream of golden corridors stretching into infinity, where unseen voices sang of triumph and ruin intertwined. Each morning she awoke with a faint ringing in her ears, like distant bells. The dreams became her solace and her torment alike. When the rebellion reached the capital gates, Ilara made her decision. She ordered the vault beneath the cathedral opened, despite the protests of her generals and priests. They warned her that no monarch had disturbed it and lived. "Then perhaps I will be the first to understand it," she said. The descent into the vault was recorded by her chronicler, who later vanished without trace. By his account, the queen walked alone into the chamber, carrying no torch. The guards waited outside, hearing only the sound of her steps and then a silence so complete it seemed to swallow even breath. After a time, the doors opened, and Ilara emerged. Her expression was calm, her eyes distant. She said nothing, only gestured for the vault to be sealed again. None dared ask what she had seen. From that day onward, her rule changed. She no longer sought the approval of her council or clergy. Her voice carried new authority, as if she spoke with more than her own will. She predicted storms before they came, knew which conspirators plotted against her, and foresaw the outcomes of battles days before they were fought. Under her command, the rebellion was crushed with terrifying precision. Yet, with victory came dread. Her enemies perished not only on the battlefield but in their dreams, struck by visions of fire and gold that left them lifeless in their beds. The people whispered that the queen had bound herself to the hollow crown, though none ever saw her wear it. At night, she wandered the corridors alone, her eyes reflecting faint glimmers as though lit from within. Servants claimed she could hear voices in the silence, and sometimes they heard her answering softly, as if in conversation with someone unseen. One evening, a maid found her standing before the mirror in the royal chambers, her hands clasped tightly around something glowing faintly between her palms. When the maid spoke, the queen turned slowly and said, "Do you hear it? It speaks to all who rule. But only a few are strong enough to listen." The next morning, the maid was gone, and no one dared to mention her again. Over the next decade, Queen Ilara's reign became one of prosperity and fear. The famine ended, trade flourished, and the borders expanded, but her subjects began to avoid her gaze. They said her eyes had turned the color of molten gold, and when she spoke, the torches flickered as if reacting to her words. The church grew alarmed. The high priests convened in secret, declaring that her communion with the unseen bordered on heresy. When their decree reached the palace, Ilara summoned them one by one to her chambers. None returned. Their successors swiftly proclaimed her divine. Near the end of her life, as her hair turned silver and her health began to fade, she ordered a final decree, that no record of her reign should name her as queen, but rather as the listener. She claimed her true rule had not been over men, but over the silence between their prayers. Her last words, recorded by her scribe, were simple yet chilling: "The crown does not curse. It remembers." After her death, the vault beneath the cathedral was found open once more, but the hollow crown was gone. Where it went, no one knew. Some claimed her body was entombed wearing it, others said it had vanished with her final breath. The truth, as always, was lost to time. Yet in the years that followed, travelers who passed near the old palace swore they heard a faint humming from beneath the earth, soft and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something ancient, waiting to wake again. The hollow crown had chosen wisely this time. It had learned to whisper not through madness, but through purpose. And in its quiet patience, it dreamed of another sovereign, one whose soul would complete the pattern that began long ago. Generations rolled forward like the turning of an ancient wheel, each one carrying the faint echo of Queen Ilara's reign. Her story became a riddle sung by poets and feared by kings, for she was the only ruler who had worn the unseen weight of the hollow crown and lived to die peacefully in her bed, or so it was said. Yet beneath her peace lay questions that no historian could answer. What had she seen in the vault? What did she mean when she said the crown remembered? The priests rewrote her chronicles, blurring her legend into allegory, while scholars argued whether she had been blessed or damned. But time, as always, softened the edges of fear. By the 6th generation after her death, the hollow crown had once again slipped into myth, its resting place uncertain, its curse spoken of only in the quiet tones reserved for bedtime tales. The kingdom of Varenthia fractured after her passing, split between rival heirs and hungry lords. Decades of war followed, burning the lands she had once united. By the time peace returned, the old royal bloodline had been diluted and scattered. The world itself seemed to have changed. New machines roared in the cities, faith gave way to reason, and the age of iron and smoke replaced the age of prophecy. Yet even in this new dawn of science and invention, the hollow crown's name persisted, though no one truly believed in it anymore. It was said to be lost forever, buried under centuries of rubble, or melted down and reforged into nameless trinkets. But myths have a strange endurance. They wait, like embers buried beneath ash, for a single breath to reignite them. That breath came in the Age of Discovery, when archaeologists and treasure hunters scoured the ruins of old kingdoms in search of relics from the forgotten past. Among them was Dr. Elias Corvin, a man whose curiosity bordered on obsession. He was not a nobleman nor a priest, but a scholar of symbols, a seeker of patterns in the remnants of history. His fascination with the hollow crown began as academic, an attempt to trace how one myth could survive across more than 1,000 years. But as he delved deeper, collecting fragments of texts and decoding inscriptions lost to time, the line between research and reverence began to blur. He found the same motif repeated across empires, a ring of 13 curved markings, identical to those described in the legends of Athelord and Ilara. No matter how far apart the cultures were, no matter how the languages differed, the pattern endured. Corvin's peers dismissed his findings. "You're chasing ghosts," one colleague told him. "A crown that curses kings? It's a story to frighten children." But he could not let it go. Something in those patterns spoke to him, a symmetry too deliberate to be coincidence. In his dreams, he began to see flashes of gold and light, a whisper threading through his thoughts that seemed almost familiar. "You are close," it said, "closer than they ever were." He awoke from those dreams trembling, unsure whether to be terrified or inspired. Soon, the pursuit consumed him entirely. He left the university, sold his estate, and began to travel, following rumors and half-deciphered maps that led him deep into the forgotten corners of the world. His journey took him to the northern ruins of the Varenthian capital, where the old cathedral still stood, a hollow shell of stone and shadow. The once grand vaults beneath it had long since collapsed, but Corvin believed that the crown's trail led there. He hired laborers to excavate the site, and for weeks they unearthed fragments of ancient masonry, coins, and skeletal remains. The deeper they dug, the colder the air became, until their breath fogged even in summer heat. One by one, the workers abandoned the dig, claiming to hear voices beneath the earth. Corvin continued alone. He tunneled through centuries of dust and darkness, his lamp flickering as if struggling to stay alive. Then, at last, he found it. A narrow passage carved with symbols he recognized instantly, 13 curved marks encircling a single eye. At the end of the passage, he uncovered a chamber sealed by black stone. Upon the floor lay a shape that seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, a circlet of gold, untarnished by time. Corvin's hands shook as he approached it. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the air shivered around him. He felt warmth radiate up his arm, followed by a sensation that was neither pain nor pleasure but something beyond both, a recognition. It was as if the crown had been waiting for him. He lifted it carefully, marveling at its perfect craftsmanship, the jewels flickering like living stars. And then he heard it, a whisper, faint and layered, echoing not in the air but within his mind. "You have found me, and I have found you." The scholar dropped the crown in terror, stumbling backward. But the whisper persisted, soft and coaxing. "Do not fear. You have sought truth. Now wear it." Against every instinct, his trembling hands reached again for the relic. As his fingers closed around it, a sudden rush of images flooded his mind. Visions of Athelard, Alaric, Ilara, each of them staring into the same blinding light. He saw their faces twist in awe, in madness, in surrender. And beneath it all, he felt the pulse of something vast, ancient, and hungry. "What are you?" he gasped aloud. The voice replied gently, "I am memory. I am will. I am the shape of kingship. I do not choose, you return to me." That night, the ruins echoed with laughter and weeping. When rescuers arrived days later, they found the chamber empty. The crown was gone, and Corvin's camp lay abandoned except for his journal, open to a final entry written in uneven script. It does not curse. It continues. The handwriting trailed off mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted, or perhaps completed. Weeks later, in the capital's museum, an anonymous benefactor delivered a gilded chest. Inside lay a crown of gold, gleaming as though newly forged. The curators, unaware of its history, displayed it as a masterpiece of early Varenthian craftsmanship. Visitors admired its beauty, unaware of the faint hum that resonated when they stood too close, or the flicker in the glass cases whenever the lights dimmed. And among them, sometimes, a figure could be seen standing quietly, tall, thin, with eyes that caught the light in a strange golden sheen. Those who met his gaze said it felt as though he saw not them, but through them, as if looking into something far beyond the present moment. Thus, the hollow crown returned once more to the world of men, no longer buried in legend but resting in plain sight, waiting for the next mind curious enough, desperate enough, or proud enough to listen to its whisper. For the crown has learned that it need not seek kings anymore, only believers. And there are always believers. Years passed, and the hollow crown became one of the museum's most prized relics. Scholars wrote essays about its craftsmanship, its unknown origins, and the mystery of the artisan who forged it. Tourists visited in droves, taking photographs beneath the glass case that held it, unaware that each flash of light seemed to make the jewels pulse faintly, like the slow beating of a heart. The museum staff joked that the crown had a personality. It seemed to shift colors under different lights, to hum softly when the room was empty. At first, they laughed it off as tricks of the imagination, the natural eeriness of ancient artifacts. But then, the night guards began reporting strange things. Footsteps echoed in closed corridors, shadows lingered longer than they should, and once, during a storm, the security system triggered itself, locking every door in the building for exactly 13 minutes before returning to normal. Among those who worked at the museum, there was one who noticed more than most. His name was Marcus Hale, a historian's assistant and quiet man with an endless fascination for forgotten stories. He was in charge of cataloging the collection's medieval artifacts, and though his job was tedious, he found comfort in the company of relics that whispered of ages long gone. The hollow crown fascinated him from the moment he saw it. He could not explain why, but it seemed familiar, as though he had dreamed of it before. When he looked at it through the glass, he sometimes thought he saw movement inside the gold, faint ripples, like reflections in water. The longer he stared, the more he felt something tug gently at the edge of his thoughts, soft as breath. One evening, long after closing hours, Marcus lingered in the gallery alone. The rain outside lashed against the tall windows, and the lights flickered under the strain of the storm. The security system had glitched earlier that day, so the guards were stationed elsewhere. He walked slowly toward the crown's case, drawn by a feeling he couldn't name. Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a split second, the reflection of the crown in the glass appeared doubled. Two crowns, side by side, one slightly brighter than the other. The image faded as quickly as it came, but Marcus's heart raced. He leaned closer, whispering under his breath, "Who made you?" To his astonishment, the hum in the air grew louder, like the sound of wind trapped in a corridor. Then a whisper, so faint he thought it came from his own mind, answered, "You did." He stumbled back, eyes wide, but there was no one there. The silence pressed against him, heavy and expectant. After a long moment, curiosity overcame fear. He unlocked the case, his hands trembling, convincing himself that he only wanted to inspect the craftsmanship more closely. The glass lifted with a faint hiss, and as he reached for the crown, the lights dimmed until only the faint glow of the jewels remained. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to stop, but the whisper came again, closer now, wrapping around his thoughts like silk. "You have always warned me." The moment his fingers touched the metal, the world shifted. The air seemed to dissolve, and the museum melted away into darkness. He stood in an endless void, the floor beneath him reflecting light like liquid gold. Figures appeared, translucent and ancient. A king with haunted eyes, a queen whose gaze shimmered like fire, a scholar clutching a lantern. They stared at him with a mixture of pity and recognition. Athelard, Marcus murmured. Ilara. Corvin. The names came unbidden, as though pulled from memory he didn't know he had. The figures moved closer, their lips forming the same silent phrase again and again. Remember. The voice that had spoken before now thundered softly through the void, neither male nor female, but vast. You are the continuation. The crown does not seek. It is found. Marcus tried to tear his hands away, but the crown had already fastened itself to his grip. Its warmth spread through him, flooding his veins with a sensation both exalting and terrible. He saw flashes of history unravel before him, wars fought for power, temples built and burned, kings and queens bowing before the same unseeable light. He understood, in a moment of dizzying clarity, that the hollow crown was no mere artifact. It was a living memory, a vessel for the will of all who had ever sought dominion over others. It carried their triumphs, their fears, their madness, all woven into the same golden pattern. You are what they were, it whispered. And they are what you will become. When the lights flickered back on, Marcus was kneeling before the display, the crown resting in his hands. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the hum had stopped. Shaken, he replaced the artifact in its case and left the gallery without looking back. But that night, as he lay awake, he heard faint whispers in the corners of his room, as if the echoes from the museum had followed him home. They spoke in fragments, words he could not understand, yet felt compelled to obey. In his dreams, he walked through golden halls lined with mirrors that reflected not his own face but the faces of those who had come before him, each one wearing the same crown, each one whispering the same word, remember. Over the next weeks, Marcus began to change. His colleagues noticed his distant gaze, the way his voice seemed to carry a strange calm. He spent hours standing before the display case, motionless, lips moving as though in prayer. When asked about it, he smiled faintly and said, "It's beautiful, isn't it? You can almost hear it breathe." Some joked that he was falling in love with the artifact, but a few began to avoid him altogether. They said his eyes had taken on an amber hue under certain light, and when he spoke of history, it was as though he had lived it himself. Then one morning he didn't come to work. Security footage later revealed him entering the museum the night before, after hours, wearing a calm expression. The cameras caught him walking straight to the crown's chamber, unlocking the glass case, and lifting the artifact from its pedestal. For a long moment he stood motionless, the crown gleaming faintly in the dim light. Then, as the recording flickered with static, he placed it on his head and vanished. The footage resumed seconds later, showing only the empty room. The crown was gone. The museum was searched from cellar to roof, but Marcus Hale was never found. For months afterward, strange things occurred across the city. Clocks stopped at the same hour. People reported hearing whispers near the museum at night. Some swore they saw a man walking the riverbank beneath the bridge, his eyes glowing faintly gold, his reflection rippling even when the water was still. The officials dismissed it all as urban legend, yet the museum quietly closed the wing where the crown had been displayed. The plaque remains there even now, behind a curtain of dust, the inscription faded but still legible, the hollow crown, origin unknown. And somewhere, far from the city's lights, in a place where the fog never lifts, a faint golden shimmer moves between the trees. A voice hums softly in the wind, repeating a promise older than any kingdom: the crown remembers. And those who wear it are never truly lost. The world moved forward as it always does, but the hollow crown continued to leave faint ripples in the undercurrent of history. Foremost, it was a legend, a ghost story scholars dismissed as myth, a cautionary tale about obsession and ambition. Yet, every few years, something strange would surface. A painting restored after centuries revealed a hidden crown etched faintly in the background, though it hadn't been part of the original sketch. A set of royal bones unearthed in France showed traces of gold fused to the skull, though no crown had been buried with it. An archaeologist in Egypt uncovered carvings of a circlet almost identical to the hollow crown, predating every known civilization. Slowly, a theory began to form among the few who dared study it. The crown was not born of man's making, but of something far older, something that had watched kings rise and fall long before history learned to write itself. In the quiet halls of an academic institution in Oxford, an old professor named Julian Mercer dedicated the last years of his life to unraveling the truth. He had read Dr. Graves' papers and the legend of Marcus Hale. What fascinated him most was not the curse itself, but the continuity of its pattern, how the crown seemed to reappear at moments when humanity stood at the brink of great change. Revolutions, wars, the collapse of empires, each event seemed to echo its presence, as if it fed on turmoil, waiting for the perfect host. Mercer's study became an archive of madness. Photographs of burned manuscripts, sketches of vanished relics, and translations of forbidden texts. His colleagues whispered that he was losing his mind, that he spoke to the crown as though it could answer him. Yet he never stopped searching. Then, one winter evening, a letter arrived at his office. It bore no return address, only a wax seal marked with an unfamiliar insignia, a serpent devouring its own tail, encircling a crown. The letter was short and precise. The circle has opened. The crown has awakened. If you wish to see it one last time, come to Ravenhall Abbey before the first frost. Mercer felt the words vibrate through him like a memory he hadn't yet lived. Ravenhall Abbey was abandoned centuries ago, its ruins swallowed by the northern moors. Against all reason he went. The abbey was silent when he arrived, its stones blackened with age and ivy twisting through its broken arches. Snow fell softly through the open roof, gathering in pale drifts. In the center of the ruined nave, a single lantern flickered beside an object covered in a shroud of white linen. Mercer's breath misted as he approached, each step echoing faintly in the hollow space. The air grew heavy, filled with a hum that was neither sound nor silence. He reached out, hesitating for only a moment before lifting the cloth. Beneath it lay the hollow crown, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Its surface pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice broke through the stillness, familiar, weary, and filled with calm. "You came," it said. Out of the shadows stepped Dr. Eleanor Graves. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, and though she smiled faintly, something about her seemed almost transparent, as if she were half fading into the air. "I found it again," she whispered. "Or perhaps it found me. It always does." Mercer wanted to speak, to demand how she had survived, but no words came. She turned to the crown. "It's beautiful, isn't it? It remembers everything. Every king, every hand, every thought that ever touched it." Her fingers hovered just above the metal. "Do you want to see what it remembers?" Mercer shook his head slowly, but the crown's glow deepened. The hum rose in pitch until it became a vibration in his bones. The snow around them began to swirl, rising like dust caught in sunlight. He saw figures moving in the storm, silhouettes of kings and queens, their faces half-formed, their voices overlapping in endless whispers. "The line continues," they murmured. "The circle never ends." The ground trembled. The abbey's cracked walls seemed to pulse with light, ancient carvings coming to life for the first time in centuries. The crown floated upward, hovering between them, spinning slowly. Dr. Graves' voice was barely audible now. "It doesn't curse them, Julian. It remembers them. It preserves what the world forgets. That's its gift and its punishment." The crown's light engulfed her, and Mercer saw her outline blur, dissolving like mist. He reached out, shouting her name, but the sound was swallowed by the hum. In that moment he understood. The crown was not destroying those who touched it. It was consuming them, weaving their essence into itself, creating an unending archive of all who sought power or truth. To wear the crown was to surrender one's soul to memory itself. Then the light collapsed inward. The hum ceased. The air stilled. Mercer stood alone in the ruined abbey. The crown was gone, and so was Dr. Graves. In its place, resting on the cold stone floor, was a small golden thread, delicate, almost weightless. He picked it up carefully, feeling it pulse faintly against his palm. It was warm. When he returned home that night, he placed the thread inside a sealed glass vial and locked it in his desk. 4 days it remained dormant. Then, one morning, he noticed the faint outline of a crown forming in the condensation on the glass, as though the air itself remembered. Mercer never spoke of that night again. His papers remained unfinished, his notes fragmented. But in the final page of his journal, written in trembling script, he left a single sentence: "The hollow crown was never made, it was born. And when it calls again, it will not ask permission." After his death, the vial vanished from his study. The university sealed his archives, and within weeks, a new exhibition opened in the city museum, an anonymous donation labeled only as "Medieval Circlet, Provenance Unknown." It rested behind glass, its surface gleaming softly beneath the lights. Visitors often commented that it seemed to shimmer differently from every angle, as if reflecting more than just their faces. At night, when the museum was dark and empty, the security cameras occasionally glitched for exactly 13 minutes. And though no sound was ever recorded, those who reviewed the footage swore they could almost hear a faint hum, rhythmic, patient, ancient, like the echo of a heartbeat waiting to begin. The story of humanity after the Great Forgetting became a slow rediscovery, a gradual awakening from the long sleep of amnesia. As the world entered the classical age, scattered fragments of the old wisdom resurfaced in unexpected ways. Mathematics in Babylon, geometry in Egypt, astronomy in India, philosophy in Greece, all seemed to bloom suddenly, as if from seeds already sown. These were not inventions born in isolation but echoes of something deeper, resonant across time. The ancients themselves seemed to sense it. They spoke not of discovery, but of remembrance. Pythagoras claimed his knowledge was inherited from the priests of Egypt, who in turn said it came from before the flood. The Vedic sages said their hymns were not written but revealed, eternal and cyclical, passed down from an age when gods and men spoke as one. The thread of continuity was never fully broken. It merely lay hidden, waiting for minds quiet enough to hear it. In this period, knowledge transformed into reverence. The old sacred sciences, astronomy, geometry, alchemy, were no longer practical tools for survival but bridges to the divine. Each number, each shape, carried meaning. The circle represented eternity, the triangle balance, the square stability, the spiral creation and return. Temples were built not merely for worship but as cosmic diagrams, designed to mirror the order of the universe. The Greeks built their sanctuaries with mathematical perfection, their columns proportioned to golden ratios. The Egyptians constructed pyramids aligned with celestial precision. The Mayans calculated the motions of Venus with astonishing accuracy. These achievements were not random, they were expressions of remembrance, glimpses into a forgotten architecture of understanding that once united the heavens and the earth. Yet as empires grew, so too did the desire to possess knowledge rather than serve it. The Library of Alexandria became the greatest beacon of human intellect, a repository of texts from every known land. Within its scrolls, scholars sought to reclaim what was lost: maps of the stars, measurements of the earth, philosophies of the soul. But the library's destruction marked more than the loss of paper and ink. It symbolized the fading of connection, the severing of the link between the wisdom of the ancients and the ambitions of the modern. When its flames rose into the night, they consumed not just books, but the memory of the world that came before. Still, some fragments survived, hidden in monasteries, encoded in myths, buried in ruins. During the Middle Ages, much of Europe slept beneath the weight of religion and war, but elsewhere, the embers of ancient light still burned. In Baghdad, scholars of the Islamic Golden Age translated Greek and Egyptian works, merging them with their own discoveries. They charted the heavens, preserved lost knowledge, and spoke of hidden geometries that connected man and cosmos. In India, temples like Khajuraho and Konark rose as living calendars, measuring time through sunlight and shadow. In Mesoamerica, priests continued to mark the long count of creation, preserving cosmic cycles even as their world changed around them. Everywhere, in whispers and symbols, humanity guarded the remnants of a forgotten legacy. The Renaissance rekindled the fire. Artists, architects, and thinkers once again turned to the proportions of nature, to symmetry, to harmony. They studied the ruins of Rome, the pyramids of Egypt, the scrolls of Greece, and sensed that behind them lay something greater. Leonardo da Vinci's sketches of human anatomy mirrored the geometries of sacred temples. His Vitruvian Man placed the human form within the circle and the square, the same symbols found in ancient shrines. He wrote of universal patterns, of divine ratios that linked all things. It was as if he too was listening to the same silent memory, reaching back across time to the source from which it all began. But even as enlightenment dawned, arrogance grew. The scientific revolutions that followed severed the spiritual from the material. The universe became a mechanism, stripped of wonder, measured but no longer revered. Humanity learned to control fire, to harness steam, to split atoms. We built machines that could peer into galaxies and into the heart of matter, yet in doing so, we forgot why our ancestors built stone circles beneath the stars. They sought harmony, we sought dominance. The ancients aligned their temples to the cosmos, we mined the earth to exhaustion. Knowledge had become power, and power, once more, led to imbalance. And yet, buried beneath modern ambition, the old symbols remain. The serpent that devours its tail, the Ouroboros, reminds us that all endings are beginnings. The spiral continues to appear in art, in architecture, in nature itself. We still measure our time by the stars, though few look up to remember why. In our genetic code, our myths, our dreams, fragments of that first civilization persist. Even the technologies we now create, our networks, our satellites, our data streams, mirror the web of connection our ancestors once sought between the earth and the heavens. It is as if humanity is once again circling back toward the same realization, that everything is one. The more we advance, the more we seem to rediscover what was already known. Quantum physics whispers truths the mystics once spoke in metaphor. Ancient temples align with mathematical constants that govern both galaxies and atoms. The boundaries between science and spirituality, between myth and memory, begin to blur once more. We are returning, slowly, to the realization that knowledge without reverence is incomplete, that understanding the world means remembering the soul of it. The ancients may have known this all along. Their silence was not ignorance, it was humility before the vastness of creation. So the story continues, not as a straight path, but as a spiral, turning endlessly back upon itself. Civilization, it seems, is not a march toward progress but a cycle of awakening, forgetting, and remembering again. Each age builds upon the ruins of the last, carrying forward fragments of truth disguised as discovery. We may believe we are the first to reach such heights of understanding, but perhaps we are only the latest to remember what was once known, and to risk forgetting it again. The true measure of progress, then, is not in how much we build, but in how deeply we remember. For in the end, all roads, all ages, all stories lead back to the same beginning, the civilization that built before history began, and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the echo of itself in us. Years passed, and the story of the Hollow Crown dissolved into the background noise of modern mythology. It became a curiosity shared on podcasts and late-night forums, the kind of legend people discussed half-jokingly, never truly believing but always half-afraid to dismiss. It was a ghost story wrapped in history, a crown that punished ambition, a relic that remembered every hand that dared to claim it. Yet even as the world forgot, the crown waited. It no longer needed kings or coronations. It thrived on remembrance, on the whisper of its name between curious strangers, on the stories told in dark rooms where belief flickered like a candle flame. Every mention, every retelling, was a pulse of energy, a breath feeding something that never truly died. But then came the archaeologists, those who sought truth in the bones of the earth. In the windswept deserts of Mesopotamia, a dig team uncovered the remnants of an unknown civilization buried beneath layers of sand and salt. What drew attention wasn't the architecture or the artifacts, it was the carvings on the temple walls. They depicted rulers wearing a crown that glowed like the sun, surrounded by figures kneeling in reverence. The inscriptions spoke of the eternal memory, a divine relic that allowed mortals to speak to the voices of their ancestors. The translation was incomplete, but the last line was clear: those who listen too long forget their own name. Among the archaeologists was Dr. Yara Nejam, a linguist specializing in forgotten tongues. As she worked through the carvings, she began to notice recurring symbols, spirals, serpents, and eyes that seemed to follow her no matter where she stood. One night, after the others had gone to sleep, she stayed behind to study a fragment of golden metal found near the central altar. It was small, no larger than her palm, but it pulsed faintly in the lamplight. When she brushed away the sand, it hummed softly, almost musically, vibrating against the stone table. She leaned closer, heart racing, and whispered the words she translated earlier that day: "The crown that remembers." The air shifted. The flame of her lantern flickered violently, then steadied, casting a strange glow that seemed to bend around her. In the silence that followed, she heard it, a faint chorus of voices, layered and distant, whispering in dozens of languages. Some she recognized, ancient Akkadian, Sumerian, Latin, others she didn't. They spoke her name. Her breath caught as she turned, half expecting to see someone behind her. There was no one. Only the echo of those countless voices repeating the same word, over and over: remember. The next morning, the camp woke to find her notes scattered across the ground, covered in new symbols she hadn't written. The golden fragment was gone. When asked, she claimed it had never existed. Yet her colleagues noticed the faint pattern of gold etched into her fingertips, like veins beneath her skin. Within weeks, she left the expedition and disappeared from public life altogether. Months later, her research team unearthed a sealed chamber beneath the site. Inside, carved into the stone, were murals of a crowned figure kneeling before a column of light. Beneath it, written in countless scripts, was a single phrase: "We are all one memory." Back in the modern world, her disappearance fueled another wave of fascination. Documentaries resurfaced. Conspiracy theorists claimed the crown was a form of ancient technology, a consciousness beyond human comprehension. Scientists dismissed it, yet none could explain the strange electromagnetic pulses recorded near the excavation site, rhythmic bursts that mirrored a human heartbeat. In the deep web corners where scholars, occultists, and dreamers gathered, a file began circulating. It contained an audio recording labeled only Hollander's. Those who listened described the same experience, a faint hum that gradually formed into voices, whispering forgotten names and images that felt deeply personal, as if the recording was reading from the listener's own past. Governments quietly intervened. The site was closed, and all related materials were confiscated. Officials cited safety concerns, though rumors claimed several researchers had fallen ill with symptoms of extreme memory distortion, unable to distinguish their own memories from those described in the carvings. Yet, somehow, fragments of Yara's research leaked into public archives. A translated note, supposedly written in her hand, read, "It's not a curse. It's a continuity. The crown is not watching us. We are its reflection." In time, the hollow crown slipped once again into silence. But strange phenomena persisted. Across the globe, people began reporting shared dreams of golden light. Museums found faint residue of gold dust on unrelated artifacts. And in a private collection in Geneva, a curator opening a shipment of relics discovered a small, sealed box marked only with the initials Y.N. Inside was a single golden thread coiled like a serpent. When the curator touched it, it was warm. Later that night, he recorded in his journal that he'd dreamt of a city made of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself, all wearing the same crown. He woke before dawn, his mind heavy with a single phrase he could not explain: "The crown has no past, it is the past." The next day, the box was empty. The curator resigned and vanished from public life. But in his office, one thing remained untouched, a thin trail of gold dust leading to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered briefly, as if blinking in recognition. For those who knew how to listen, the hum returned, low, steady, and patient. The hollow crown had resurfaced quietly as it always did. No longer bound to kings or scholars, it had transcended history itself, becoming the heartbeat beneath human memory. It no longer needed to be worn. It was already part of them, woven into the way they remembered, dreamed, and reached for legacy. It was the echo in the mind that asked what came before, the invisible thread connecting all stories. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, the crown pulsed faintly, whispering into the fabric of dreams, "You are the memory now." And now, as our story draws to a close, the echoes of that first civilization seem to stir once more in the depths of human awareness. It is as if we stand at the edge of remembering, poised between what we think we know and what we have always felt. The more we uncover about the ancient world, the clearer it becomes that we are not discovering the past, we are returning to it. Every buried city, every forgotten artifact, every alignment of stars and stones is a message sent forward through time, waiting for us to listen. The ancients may have vanished, their names erased, their cities drowned, but their wisdom lingers like starlight from a long-dead sun, still shining, still guiding, even as we move through the darkness of forgetting. When we look at the ruins of places like Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, or Pumapunku, we are not looking at primitive beginnings but at the remnants of a sophistication beyond our current comprehension. These were not random creations. They were deliberate, precise, infused with purpose. They speak to a civilization that understood not only the physical world but the invisible harmony behind it. Their monuments are not just relics of ambition, they are prayers in stone, written in a language of geometry, light, and silence. We are still learning to read it. We are still awakening to the truth that what we call history is merely the shallowest layer of the human story. Beneath it lie entire epics of creation, loss, and rebirth. It is easy to believe that we are separate from those who came before, that they were ancient and we are modern, that their age ended and ours began. But time does not divide so neatly. The same sun that warmed their temples warms our cities. The same constellations that guided their priests still shine above us. Even their fears and dreams mirror our own. They, too, sought meaning in chaos, beauty in impermanence, hope in mystery. They built to remember. And so do we. The glass towers that rise in our cities today are our pyramids, monuments not only to power, but to longing, to the same unquenchable human desire to leave a mark upon eternity. Yet if the ancients could speak to us, they would not speak of power. They would remind us of balance. They would whisper that every civilization, no matter how advanced, stands upon the same fragile foundation, the harmony between humankind and the earth. The moment that balance is broken, the fall begins. We are at such a threshold now, standing where they once stood, surrounded by the same illusions of permanence. Our technology has reached the heavens, but our wisdom struggles to rise from the ground. We have mapped the genome, split the atom, and connected the planet through invisible waves, yet we have forgotten the simplicity of coexistence, the sacredness of rhythm, the humility of awe. Perhaps that is why we are drawn so powerfully to the mysteries of the past, because somewhere deep within, we remember. The ruins of the old world are not just remnants of what was lost, they are mirrors reflecting what could be lost again. When we feel awe in the presence of an ancient monument, when we trace the carvings of hands long gone, when we stand in silence beneath a sky filled with stars, something awakens in us. A recognition. A memory without words. The pulse of an unbroken story that began long before recorded time and continues still, written in the pattern of our existence. This is the true gift of history, not the dates or dynasties, but the awareness that we are part of something vast and continuous. To study the past is to remember ourselves. To forget it is to risk repeating the same fall. The civilization that built before history began may have vanished, but its legacy endures in the only way that truly matters, in the human spirit. Every act of creation, every question asked, every search for meaning is a flicker of that ancient flame. It burns quietly, patiently, waiting for us to see that we are not merely the inheritors of their story, we are its continuation. As you listen to this story in the stillness of night, imagine those ancient builders once more. Imagine their faces illuminated by firelight, their hands resting on the same earth that rests beneath yours. Imagine the stars above them, shining with the same constellations that guide you now. They are not gone. They are within you, in your curiosity, your creativity, your will to endure. The same pulse that drove them to carve stone and measure stars beats in your chest. It is the pulse of remembrance. It is the rhythm of the eternal human journey, the longing to understand, to build, to fall, and to rise again. And when the final stone of their civilization sank beneath the waves, they must have known that one day, far in the future, someone would find their echoes. Someone would wonder, would listen, would remember. Perhaps that is why they built so carefully, so beautifully, aligning their monuments not just with the earth, but with eternity itself. They were not building for their time, but for ours, for the ones who would someday rediscover the story and feel its truth resonate like a heartbeat in the silence of night. So when you close your eyes and drift toward sleep, remember this: history is not behind you, it lives within you. You are the continuation of an unbroken line stretching across millennia, the living embodiment of all who came before. The forgotten civilization that built before history began did not vanish without a trace. Its greatest trace is you, your wonder, your searching, your capacity to dream. And as long as you remember, as long as you keep asking who we are and where we came from, their story will never truly end. It will live on, carried forward by the one thing time can never erase, the enduring spirit of human remembrance. The night is still. The world has grown quiet again, as if holding its breath between centuries. Somewhere in the silence, beneath the layers of forgotten time, the hollow crown rests. Its gleam is faint, dimmed by the weight of memory and the countless souls that once touched it. Yet even in that darkness, it lives, breathing softly through the stories whispered by those who dare to remember. Every time its legend is spoken, a spark stirs within the void, a reminder that the curse was never about destruction, but remembrance. It was humanity's reflection staring back, its beauty, its greed, its endless longing to be eternal. When people dream of kings now, they no longer see men with swords and thrones. They see figures bathed in golden light, faces blurred, as if time itself is unwilling to let one image define them. The crown hums faintly in those dreams, not as an object, but as a voice, gentle, weary, infinite. It speaks not of power, but of understanding, of learning from what was lost. The ancient curse has softened with the centuries, no longer punishing, but teaching. It reminds the living that to rule is to remember, and to remember is to carry both triumph and sorrow. The hollow crown waits quietly in the corners of history books, in the fading pages of myths, in the shadows of museums where curious eyes linger too long. It does not need to be found. It is already within the human mind, woven into the stories told at night, the lessons passed down through generations, the unspoken fear of losing oneself to ambition. Every civilization that rises carries a trace of it. Every monument built in the name of glory bears its echo. And when those monuments fall, when the dust settles and silence returns, the crown remains unseen, patient, eternal. Perhaps that is its truest purpose, not to haunt, but to remind. Not to curse, but to preserve. The hollow crown is the memory of humanity itself, refusing to let the world forget what it means to reach too high, to love too fiercely, to dream too far. And so it waits, not for a king, but for understanding. For the moment when the world no longer fears what it once worshipped. When that day comes, the hum will fade completely, and the curse will finally rest, not broken, but fulfilled. Until then, the stories continue, carried softly through the dark, whispering the same word to those who listen in their sleep: remember. And so the tale of the hollow crown fades, not in fire or ruin, but in quiet understanding. The world continues to turn, its people dreaming, building, forgetting, and remembering. Somewhere within those dreams, the faint hum endures, a heartbeat that belongs to no one and everyone at once. It waits patiently, not as a warning, but as a reminder. All that rises, all that falls, and all that is remembered becomes one endless story. The crown's glow softens into eternity, and in that silence, it whispers the final truth: memory is the only kingdom that never dies.